Alright guys, here we go. This 2001 Isuzu Trooper. And today we're going to be swapping out the CV shaft. And I'm going to show you guys how to take apart what's called a captive rotor. So the first thing we want to do, this is a really good spot I found on this truck, is a jack point. Right there, right behind the front axle before the frame rail turns up. It's a good spot, and then I put a jack stand up under the lower control arm mount. And in order to pull the front tire off, we use a 13/16 deep well socket, and that's the start. Okay, so once you got it all jacked up, locked and secured and in gear, the first thing we got to do is take off this axle end shaft cover here. And this is a 5/16 Allen wrench. What I like to do is secure the brake rotor via the slot with a screwdriver like that, and that'll allow you to break those free. I usually tap on it with a hammer, tap tap tap, and then I'll allow you to take those off. So once you get all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those off, you're going to want to go ahead and get a 3/8 drive ratchet with a short well socket and a short well 17mm socket here. And now that you have your rotor secured, what I like to do is take a breaker bar that I keep handy right here, put that on, and then you can go ahead and break all 6 of those that secure that hub assembly there. And then I'll take that apart and show you what the next step is here. Okay, so now that you got that end cap dust cover off, you're going to notice there's a small snap ring up against the edge of this end cap, and there's also a little washer there as well. You're going to want to remove both of those. Once you do that, you can pull this end cap off here. You might have to tap on it. Notice the splines in there. Once you have that removed, you're going to notice a couple screws holding this washer in here. This washer goes up against the bearing tensioner nut. Be careful not to strip the ends of those screw heads out. There's one there, and then one here, and one right here. So now you're going to want to remove this washer out of here, just like that. Put that in your parts box there. What you're going to notice is this tensioner nut here. This is threaded. You're going to want to make a mark. Use your pick or a magic marker and mark that, because you don't want to over tension this nut and heat up the bearing. It's really important. So in order to take that off, you can take your hammer, tap this counterclockwise, tap the end of the hammer, and unscrew that until it completely comes off. Alright, now that you've removed the bearing lock nut, and you can see that right there, you're ready to remove the 2 17mm caliper bolts located here and here. You go ahead and take your brake caliper off, and I like to hang it with a piece of wire just so it's not binding up against that brake line there. Once you've done that, you're ready to take off the rotor bearing assembly here. Let's see if I can get it with one hand. Alright, I got it. And there you go. You have just removed a captive rotor, and there's the outer wheel bearing there, and there's your spindle. Alright, on to the next step. Okay, now your next step here is to remove the shock mount bolt. Get that free and out of your way. That's a 17mm. Now we're going to go to the lower ball joint here, and I have my pickle fork set. Take the hammer, drive this in to separate that lower ball joint. Once you've removed the cotter pin and the 1/8" nut that goes here. Another way to do this also is to back the nut off so it's even with this the end of the stud here, so you don't mess the threads up, and you can pound on that nut sometimes to get it to separate. In this case, I'm using my hammer here, and I'm separating that little ball joint just like that. After you get that separated, you're gonna back. Okay, now your next step here is to remove the shock mount bolt. Get that free and out of your way. That's a 17mm. Now we're gonna go to the lower ball joint here, and I have my pickle fork set. Take the hammer, drive this in to separate that lower ball joint. Once you've removed the cotter pin and the 1/8" nut that goes here. Another way to do this also is to back the nut off so it's even with this the end of the stud here, so you don't mess the threads up, and you can pound on that nut sometimes to get it to separate. In this case, I'm using my hammer here, and I'm separating that little ball joint just like that. After you get that separated, you're going to back off this 22mm nut here after you pull the cotter pin and separate your tie rod end. And last, alright, now that you can see I got the CV shaft assembly separated from the outer spindle, I was able to do this by removing the 4 17mm bolts right there in the lower control arm assembly, and I removed them from the ball joint bracket. In this case, I separated the ball joint, the lower ball joint assembly, but you can actually do it without separating that ball joint, which will save you some time. And if you have a really stuck, seized ball joint, it'll allow you to do it. As you can see, I actually left the upper ball joint assembly, and how I did that, lifting up on this whole assembly and pulling the CV shaft out of the back side. It's a big time saver, easiest way to do that right there. Alright, so now that you got the lower ball joint removed and out of the way, those 4 17mm bolts there and the outer spindle assembly off, we can go ahead and remove the CV clamp here on this and slide the CV boot back. And inside this bearing case here, there's a snap ring right where my finger is. You can push this axle assembly in and reach that snap ring there and pull it out. That way you can take out the whole half shaft assembly. Alright, here we go. And there's that snap ring right there. Alright, so now that you got your old CV shaft out, you're going to want to clean out the bearing housing and go ahead and repack that with fresh grease. I like to use this Lucas Red and Tacky. I'm going to clean my wheel bearings and repack those as well. Lucas products are great. Use them from engine oil, trans oil, differential fluid. There's the new CV shaft there. And that's the extent of the job. Just work in the opposite direction now, putting everything back together.